Disclaimer: this video is a fictional storytelling production created for entertainment purposes only. It does not depict real people, events, or situations. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. This story explores themes of love, relationships, and emotional conflict in a respectful and YouTube-safe manner. Viewer discretion is advised. I remember the first time he walked into our home. He wasn't a stranger to my husband. He had been his friend for years, a familiar face at business gatherings and weekend get-togethers. But to me, that evening felt different. There was something in the way he entered, in the way his presence seemed to quietly shift the air around the room. He carried himself with a calm kind of confidence, unassuming, yet impossible not to notice. His voice had a depth that lingered, even after his laughter faded into the hum of conversation. When he greeted me, his hand brushed lightly against mine, just long enough for me to notice the warmth of his skin. It was the kind of touch that should have meant nothing, polite, respectful, but it stayed with me, echoing faintly like a whisper against my palm. Dinner was ordinary. The clatter of plates, the aroma of roasted chicken, the usual rhythm of a weeknight meal. Yet, between the laughter and casual banter, I found myself watching him more closely than I should have. The way he listened intently when someone spoke, his eyes steady and patient. The way he leaned back in his chair, relaxed but engaged, as though every word mattered. There was something about that quiet attentiveness, something I realized I had been missing for a long time. When our eyes met across the table, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even obvious. Just a brief moment, a passing glance that lingered a second longer than necessary. Still, in that second, it felt as though he saw more of me than most people ever bothered to. It unsettled me, because I hadn't expected to feel anything at all. After all, he was just my husband's friend. Later that evening, as I cleared the table, I could sense him behind me, carrying glasses to the sink. The faint scent of his cologne, something crisp and understated, mingled with the steam from the dishwater. He placed the glasses gently on the counter, his hand brushing mine once more, this time softer, almost hesitant. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining the quiet electricity in that moment. But when I looked up, his gaze caught mine again. Neither of us said a word, yet the silence between us spoke volumes. My breath caught not in fear, but in the unfamiliar awareness of being truly noticed. That night, long after he had left, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. My husband's steady breathing beside me should have been comforting. Instead, my mind replayed the smallest of details. The warmth of his hand, the depth of his voice, the way his eyes held mine across the table. It made no sense. He was just my husband's friend. And yet, in the quiet of that night, I already knew. Something inside me had shifted. The days that followed were ordinary on the surface, yet something beneath them had changed. His visits became more frequent, sometimes for business with my husband, sometimes just to pass by. Each time, I told myself it was nothing unusual. Friends come and go, laughter fills the house, life goes on. And yet, whenever he was near, I felt an energy in the air that I couldn't quite name. It showed up in the smallest of ways. The way he'd glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his voice would soften slightly when he spoke to me, as though the conversation belonged only to us. Once, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, we all sat in the living room watching an old movie. My husband fell asleep midway through, his soft breathing filling the silence, while the rest of us stayed watching. I remember sitting at the far end of the couch, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He shifted, moving just enough so that the space between us seemed smaller, though not enough to draw attention. Our knees almost touched. Almost. That narrow distance between us felt louder than the movie playing on the screen. At one point, he leaned closer to comment on a scene, his voice low, meant only for me. I could feel the warmth of his breath near my ear, and it sent a quiet shiver down my spine. His words weren't anything extraordinary, just a remark about the film. But the way he said them, the closeness of it, made me feel as if we were sharing a secret the rest of the world couldn't hear. I tried to brush it off to keep my composure, but when our eyes met in that dimly lit room, there was no mistaking it. Something passed between us. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. I quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the blanket draped over my legs. Still, the awareness of him lingered, filling every corner of the room. It wasn't only in the evenings. During the day, if he happened to be around, he'd ask small, thoughtful questions. About the garden, about the books I liked to read, about how I spent my quiet hours when my husband was away. It struck me because he truly listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't brush aside the little details. Instead, he leaned into them, as if each answer I gave mattered more than I realized. And I began to notice myself anticipating those moments. The sound of his knock at the door. The way he'd smile in greeting, eyes flickering toward mine just a second longer than polite. The warmth in his voice whenever he said my name. They were simple things, so subtle that anyone else would have overlooked them. But to me, they became threads weaving themselves into the fabric of my days. One evening, after he had left, I caught myself standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair longer than usual, wondering why I cared so much about how I looked. That realization startled me. I told myself I was foolish, that I was reading too much into simple kindness. Yet deep down, I couldn't ignore it anymore. His presence had begun to mean something. Something I didn't yet dare to name, but something I felt all the same. It was a quiet evening when everything between us shifted again. Quiet, in the kind of way where every sound seemed to matter. My husband had left earlier that afternoon on a short business trip, asking his friend to stop by and check on a leaky pipe in the kitchen. I expected it to be a quick visit, nothing more than a small repair and a polite goodbye. But life has a way of turning simple moments into something unforgettable. I stood by the counter as he worked beneath the sink, the sound of running water mixing with the occasional clink of metal tools. The kitchen light cast a soft glow on the room, and I found myself leaning against the doorway, watching him. His movements were steady, careful, as though even fixing a pipe was something worth doing with patience. When he finally rose, wiping his hands on a cloth, he caught me watching. For a moment, neither of us looked away. He smiled, not in the easy, casual way he usually did, but softer, almost private. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, though I quickly busied myself with filling a glass of water. He reached for the glass as I handed it to him, and in that brief exchange, his fingers brushed mine. This time it was deliberate, lingering just a fraction longer than before. His hand was warm, steady, and in that touch, I felt something that words could never hold. My breath hitched, though I tried to mask it with a small smile. We stood there, facing each other in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. It wasn't just silence. It was weight, charged and unspoken. He finally broke it with a question, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you ever feel unseen?" The question startled me. It was unexpected, personal, far removed from the safe, casual exchanges we usually had. My instinct was to laugh it off, to shift the topic. But when I met his eyes, I realized he wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he had noticed. I hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes," I admitted quietly. My voice trembled with the weight of honesty, because it wasn't something I said aloud often. He held my gaze, and in that look, I felt understood in a way I hadn't in years. "You shouldn't be," he said softly, almost to himself. "Not someone like you." The words weren't elaborate, but they landed deep, stirring something I had long buried under routine and silence. For the first time, I let myself feel the truth. I wanted to be seen. And here he was, seeing me. The rest of the evening passed in simple conversation, yet nothing about it felt simple. He asked about my favorite books, my dreams when I was younger, the places I wished I had traveled. He listened with genuine care, and each answer I gave seemed to matter to him. When he finally left, the kitchen light seemed too dim, the house too quiet. As I stood alone in that stillness, my hand lingered over the glass he had used, as if holding onto the warmth of that brief touch. It was then I knew whatever was unfolding between us wasn't ordinary. It was something deeper, something dangerous, and something I couldn't bring myself to stop. That night, the rain came suddenly. Heavy drops tapped against the windows, filling the house with a rhythm that made everything else seem slower, softer. My husband was still away, and the silence of the house made the sound even more pronounced. When the knock at the door came, I wasn't surprised. It was him, carrying the excuse of checking whether the repair had held through the storm. I let him in, grateful for the company, though I told myself it was nothing more than neighborly kindness. The truth, however, was harder to deny. I had been waiting for that knock, listening for it even before it came. We sat at the kitchen table, the dim lamp casting a warm circle of light between us. Steam rose from the mugs of coffee I had poured, and the rain outside pressed like a curtain around us, cocooning the moment. It felt like the world had shrunk to just this space, just the two of us, bound by the hush of the storm. At first, we talked about nothing, the dripping of the gutters, the way storms always seem to bring a chill to summer nights. But gradually, our words grew heavier, more personal. He asked if I ever felt lonely when my husband traveled. The question was gentle, yet it carried weight. I hesitated, searching for the right words, then finally admitted, "Yes, more than I want to admit." He nodded slowly, his eyes lowering to the steam rising from his cup before lifting back to meet mine. "I've noticed," he said softly. "You try to hide it, but I see it." Something inside me shifted at those words. To be seen like that, to have someone not only notice, but care enough to speak it aloud, was both terrifying and comforting. My chest tightened, a mix of longing and guilt twisting together. "I don't mean to," I whispered, my voice barely rising above the rain. "It's easier to just carry it quietly." He leaned closer then, his elbow resting on the table, his voice low and steady. "You don't always have to carry it alone." The silence that followed was thick, alive with everything we didn't dare say. His hand rested on the table, open, steady, as if waiting for mine without asking. I didn't reach for it, but I wanted to. The space between us felt like it was humming, each second pulling us closer without either of us moving. Finally, he broke the silence with words that left me breathless. "You deserve more than being someone's afterthought. You deserve to be chosen, every single day." My heart ached at the truth of it, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. I looked away, afraid of what he might see if I held his gaze too long. Yet even in that moment of hesitation, I knew he was right, and I knew that I wanted desperately to believe him. When I finally looked back at him, the rain still pounding against the glass, his expression was calm but full of something unspoken, something I couldn't deny any longer. The storm outside raged on, but inside, all I could hear was the sound of my own heart, steady and unrelenting, answering a truth I had kept hidden for far too long. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air damp and cool, the scent of rain still clinging to the earth. He stopped by again the following evening, saying he wanted to make sure the leak hadn't returned. I knew he didn't need to come back, that the repair was fine, but I didn't question it. In truth, I wanted him there, though I would never admit it aloud. The house was quiet when he entered, the kind of quiet that carried its own weight. We found ourselves in the kitchen once more, the same warm light spilling across the table, shadows softening the edges of the room. I placed a plate of fruit between us, something small to busy my hands, though they trembled more than I wanted him to notice. We spoke lightly at first, about the weather, about the stubborn pipe that had finally stopped dripping. But the words felt like a fragile curtain over something much heavier. His eyes kept finding mine, and every time they did, I felt a rush of heat that left me unsteady. At one point, I reached for a slice of apple, and so did he. Our hands brushed, a fleeting touch that should have meant nothing. Yet this time, neither of us pulled away. His fingers stilled against mine, warm and sure, while my breath caught in my throat. The silence that followed felt deafening, filled only by the pounding of my heart. He turned his hand slightly, letting his fingertips graze across my knuckles in the gentlest of motions. It wasn't bold. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate, reverent, like he was asking a question without words. I should have withdrawn. I should have ended it there. But instead, I let my hand remain where it was, caught between his and the smooth wood of the table. The warmth of his skin seeped into mine, sending a quiet shiver through me. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, caught between fear and longing. When I finally looked up, his eyes were waiting for me. Steady, searching, filled with something I had tried so hard not to name. And in that gaze, I saw my own reflection. The ache of being seen, of being wanted, of being more than just someone's wife. His thumb brushed gently over my hand then, slow and careful, as though he feared the moment might break if he moved too quickly. It was the smallest of touches, yet it carried more weight than any words ever could. I swallowed hard, my voice unsteady as I whispered, "We shouldn't." The words were weak even to my own ears, trembling against the truth in my chest. He didn't argue, didn't press. He only held my gaze, his hand still resting softly against mine. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't pretend I don't feel it." The world seemed to pause in that instant. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, even the beating of my own heart. All of it blurred into the background. All that remained was the warmth of his hand over mine, the unspoken truth that something had shifted between us, something neither of us could undo. When he finally let go, the absence of his touch felt like a hollow echo, and yet the memory of it burned into my skin, into my very being. For the first time, the line we had both been pretending not to see was crossed. Not with a kiss, not with words, but with a simple, lingering touch that carried the weight of everything we had been holding back. That night, sleep would not come. The memory of his hand resting over mine replayed again and again, like a secret I carried under my skin. Every detail haunted me. The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his gaze, the quiet certainty in his voice when he admitted he couldn't ignore what he felt. I tried to push it away, tried to bury myself in the stillness of the house, but nothing silenced the ache building in my chest. Hours passed. The rain had long stopped, and the world outside lay wrapped in a deep, velvety silence. I wandered to the living room, pulling a shawl over my shoulders. The window stood open just enough to let in the cool night air, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. I stood there for a while, staring out into the moonlit yard, my thoughts restless and tangled. And then I heard it, the soft knock at the door. When I opened it, he stood there. He didn't speak right away, and neither did I. There was no need for explanations. Somehow, we both knew why he had come. His expression held a quiet conflict, but also a determination that mirrored my own. For a moment, I thought of closing the door, of retreating back into safety. But instead, I stepped aside. He entered quietly, the weight of the moment pressing between us. The room felt smaller with him inside it, as though the very air thickened. We stood in silence, neither daring to move, until at last he took a step closer. "You couldn't sleep either?" he asked softly. I shook my head. My voice felt too fragile to trust, so I said nothing. He hesitated, his hand lifting slightly, then falling back to his side. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. I swallowed, my heart racing, my voice barely steady. "I know." And yet neither of us moved away. Instead, he stepped closer, slow enough that I could have stopped him. But I didn't. His hand finally found my shoulder, resting there with the gentlest of pressure. The warmth of his palm seeped through the fabric of my shawl, grounding me, steadying me. I turned toward him, and in the quiet space between us, our eyes met. Everything unspoken, everything we had held back, surged in that gaze. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, as though the world had narrowed to this single instant. Then, without another word, I closed the distance. I leaned into him, my cheek resting against his chest. His arms came around me slowly, carefully, as though afraid I might break. The steadiness of his heartbeat thudded beneath my ear, strong and reassuring. For the first time in years I felt held, not out of duty, not out of routine, but out of choice. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, saying nothing, wrapped in a silence far louder than words. The warmth of his embrace seeped deep into me, melting away layers of loneliness I had carried for so long. I breathed in the faint scent of him, something familiar now, something that would never leave me. When at last I pulled back, his hands lingered lightly at my arms, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me tremble. He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. That embrace had already changed everything. The line we had crossed could never be redrawn. And though the night outside was still, inside me, everything had shifted. Morning arrived slowly, the first pale light of dawn spilling gently across the curtains. I woke not from sleep, but from hours of quiet reflection, still wrapped in the memory of the night before. His arms around me, the weight of his heartbeat beneath my cheek, the silence that had spoken louder than words. It all lingered, etched deep into me. The house was still. My husband was days away from returning, and yet the air already felt different, heavier with the truth I now carried. I moved through the morning rituals, boiling water for coffee, slicing bread for toast, but every action felt touched by last night. My hands trembled slightly as I set the table, because part of me wondered if it had all been a dream. And then the soft knock came again. I opened the door, and there he was, standing in the early light, his expression steady but cautious, as though unsure if the night before had changed me as much as it had changed him. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Neither of us needed to ask why he was there. We both knew. I let him in, the kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh coffee as he sat across from me. The sunlight fell across the table, catching the lines of his face, softening them, making him seem younger, though still carrying the quiet strength that had drawn me in from the beginning. We didn't speak at first. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full, alive with everything that needed no explanation. At last, he reached across the table. His hand found mine, tentative at first, then firm as I let my fingers intertwine with his. The warmth of his touch spread through me, steadying the storm inside. I don't know what happens next, I admitted, my voice low, trembling with both fear and relief. I only know that last night, it wasn't a mistake. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something unguarded in him. A vulnerability he had hidden beneath quiet strength. It wasn't, he said simply. It was real. And whatever comes, I don't want to pretend otherwise. The words settled between us like a promise, fragile but unbreakable. I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of finally being seen, of being chosen. For so long, I had moved through life unnoticed, my heart quiet beneath the routines of marriage and expectation. And now, sitting at that kitchen table with his hand in mine, I felt alive again. We didn't speak of the future, not in detail. We didn't talk of consequences or choices yet to be made. Those conversations would come, and they would be heavy. But in that moment, it was enough to sit in the sunlight, to feel the warmth of his fingers laced through mine, and to know that the world had shifted in ways neither of us could undo. As the morning stretched on, I realized the truth. Life would never return to what it had been. We had crossed a line that could not be redrawn. But instead of fear, I felt something else, something like hope. Hope that love, even when it arrives unexpectedly, even when it defies reason, can still be real. And as he squeezed my hand gently, offering no grand promises, only presence, I knew one thing with quiet certainty. Whatever path lay ahead, I would not walk it unseen anymore.